welcome to the Vocal Fries Podcast, the podcast about linguistic discrimination.
I'm Carrie Gillen.
And I'm Megan Figueroa. And I had to ask Carrie how to start this podcast just now. It's only our almost our 4th anniversary, Carrie.
Almost 4 years.
Yeah. And almost, well, we're at like 90 episodes of saying this intro and just couldn't remember it right now.
I think this is 86.
86? Okay. That's exciting.
Yeah.
4 years. 4 years. And I'm wondering if we might be saying hello to new listeners, maybe, because we were in the New York Times.
Well, you were, but yeah. Our podcast was named. But yes, it's great.
Yeah, it was. I didn't actually realize what it was for, besides being about linguistic discrimination and being careful with words if you want to be thoughtful about, you know, who you might be offending or oppressing by using certain words. I didn't know it would be part of this, like, 9 ways to make the world a little bit better, kinder, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So I thank you, AC Shilton. She told me that it was only 400 words, and I thought that was strange, but now I'm seeing why. So just like these little things about how you can be, you know, kinder. And kinder to the earth, there is one about biking.
Cool.
So
we're going to be biking later today to go to the cat cafe.
Oh, how nice. Yeah. Well, you know, it's 100 degrees here, and biking becomes a little bit more difficult.
Oh, I know. I remember. I still did it, unless it got, like, I think it was above 110. I just wouldn't do it. But I think below, I still did it. But it was rough.
My body's constitution can't take that very well, because then I get, like, tachycardia. Like, all these things. So, like, at a certain point, I just can't do these things.
No, it's physically hard, and it gets harder the hotter it is. So, yeah.
It really, yeah. So, yeah, anyway, we're in the New York Times, so if you're here because of that, we really appreciate it. And this
welcome.
Is such a good episode to come
my
into.
God, yeah, seriously. I love this episode. I mean, I always say that, but this one is just, like, I don't know, it's just fun to talk about, like, acting and dialects. And
I feel like even 5 years ago, maybe we could have reached out to someone random that was a dialect coach, and it could have been like, oh, this is kind of problematic. But it's not 5 years ago. It's Eric Singer, who is just a huge sweetheart and is awesome at his job and actually pays attention to, like, the world of linguistics and what's going on. He's
getting trained right now in extra stuff that I didn't even understand. I was like, okay, what are you talking about?
Oh, yeah. So Eric and we work together on the Wired videos. He is the Wired video guy. Millions and millions of views on his Wired videos about accents and dialect coaching and all of this. Because people, like Carrie said, it's really fun to talk about these things. It's really fun. He's definitely coming back. We need to have him back. He said he would, because I feel like we had hours more.
Oh my goodness. We totally did. Yeah.
Yeah, like Carrie said, I find this to be super delightful. I love all of our guests. But it's nice to kind of talk about something that is just completely out of our wheelhouse.
Yeah. Like, you know, I've done some acting in my like life, but mostly, you know, as an adolescent or child. But still, I have done it. And I still felt like I knew nothing. Like, he was just teaching me all these things. It was great. And then also on the, like, accent side, you know, just stuff I hadn't even really considered, like prosody. Like, why had I never considered prosody? Of course, prosody is different in different dialects. Like, I know that intellectually, but it just hadn't occurred to me, you know? I love it.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's true, because it's so huge when you're thinking about someone who speaks some sort of Spanish influence variety of English, like Chicano English. Prosody is so important. And it's oftentimes what people get wrong if they're trying to do it. Oh, and this episode made me gain so much respect for actors.
Yeah.
Just so much. I think that before this, I went in judging them getting accents, quote unquote, wrong. But I've just new respect. I really thank Eric for that. Hopefully you all get something out of it too. But yeah, so much fun. I know, sometimes it's fun to be a linguist, right, Carrie?
Sometimes it's fun to be a linguist, and sometimes it's heartbreaking. So,
yeah,
in a terrible, terrible turn. I don't know if you've heard about this, but the French government is trying to clamp down on minority languages in France. Again, I mean, they do this all the time, but they basically refused to introduce legislation to allow Breton which is a Celtic language, to be taught in French schools.
Wait, so they passed legislation, or they put forth legislation?
Refused to introduce legislation to basically support Breton.
Okay.
So it was proposed by a politician, Paul Molac. I guess that's how you say his name. I apologize if I mispronounced that. He wanted to have linguistic immersion in Brittany, where Breton is spoken, and so just to like actually promote this language that has existed there for a long time. And now, of course, the French is probably the first country to have one language, one country ideology, going back to the French Revolution.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So they've always been like really hard on minority languages in their own country, like Occitan and Breton and others that I'm not thinking of right now.
Right.
Oh, Basque, of course.
Sure. Huh. Well, thank you for teaching me that. I mean, there have been people in the U.S. that have been gunning hard for the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. English first, English only. Don't fall asleep on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The United States was, created around the same time as the French Revolution. So maybe the U.S. was influenced in many, many ways. I mean, it clearly was. I know it was influenced in many ways by the French Revolution, but maybe one of the ways was one language, one country.
Yeah, for our book, I've been reading so much about our history with monolingualism and bilingualism, multilingualism, because at some points it was, revered. We go back and forth depending on the global context. The U.S. anyway, and whether or not bilingualism or multilingualism is good or bad and who it's good for. We've talked about that many times. We hope you enjoy. You will enjoy this episode.
Definitely.
So we should get on to Eric then.
Like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free, and they have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
So I am so excited to have my friend Eric Singer here today, who is a dialect coach, a master teacher of Knight Thompson speech work, a dialectcoaches.com verified master coach, and a certified associate teacher of Fitzmaurice voice work, which means he knows his shit. He works on set and off for productions and for private clients to help actors successfully realize the voices and accents of the characters they play. He also regularly teaches workshops in speech and accents, both to actors and to other voice and speech teachers and professional dialect coaches. And also, he is the Wired magazine video guy. And so he is the guy. He recently created a video map tour of North American accents, which I am a part of, which is so lovely. Thank you so much, Eric, for being here and for having me on your North American accents video tour and all that. So we're so happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
By God, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for asking me. I've been a longtime fan of the show, and I was so pleased when you agreed to be in the map tour. And that it's just sort of working on building that up, and then that contribution. It's just really, really, really valuable. I'm so happy to have you in it, and I'm incredibly honored to be asked to be here. So I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you are like the linguist's dialect coach. I feel like that's true.
That's all I've ever wanted to be. That makes you have no idea how happy that makes me.
Yeah. No, it's just so amazing. I was just thinking about, writing up the little thing to introduce you, and you have millions and millions and millions of views on your Wired videos.
Yeah, they're up to, I think my manager counted last month or something. I think they're up to like 60 million, or over 60 million or something.
Oh, wow.
It's a lot of views.
Yeah, that is.
It's amazing.
For linguistics, y'all.
Exactly. No, that's what I'm saying. So I was just thinking, these people are watching this, and some of them may have never even actually heard the word linguistics, may not even know that they care about linguistics or think it's interesting. So you're doing...
But they do.
Exactly.
Everybody does.
I know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They just need to be exposed to the right part of linguistics, and for each person that's a different thing. But everyone loves accents.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's a few who love generative semantics.
Yeah.
It's a very tiny group. Even within semantics, it's a small group.
All right, so these videos, you're introducing people to accents or dialects. What exactly is a dialect or accent? Let's start there. Like, what is that? What are we watching when we watch, like, your Wired videos and what you do as a professional?
Well, that's like 3 questions. Those are all great questions, though. But actually, I'm so glad you asked the first one, because there's a thing that gets confused in my area of the woods that it's great to address, and it's great to straighten out. So for me, and I feel like this is pretty well aligned with like linguistic usage and general usage and usage in the UK, an accent is the sounds. Right, an accent is the phonetics and the phonology, and it's just how the sounds are realized. And dialect, if we're going to use the word as opposed to language variety, which is what I generally try to use, includes everything else. So it includes that, but it's also it's morphology and syntax, it's word order, and it's lexicon, it's the words you use, it's all of that, right? And what I do is probably actually best described as being an accent coach. But the name of the job is dialect coach. Early on, I was kind of sort of trying to make noises about, we should try to change this. And it was pointed out to me by someone a lot wiser and more senior than me that, in fact, in film and TV, which I was only sort of just starting to do, right, in plays and theater, the playwright is king, right? You don't change the words. In film and TV, you change the words all the time. It's different, from project to project, right? But actors and directors are very often rejiggering things. Sometimes they're outright improvising. And so, whereas in theater and in my training as an actor and in my experience as an actor, which was mostly in theater, you really are, like, the playwright's taken care of that. So it's like, it's good to know as much as you can about it. You just, like, as an actor, you want to have done your research. You want all the imaginative connections you possibly can. But, basically what I'm responsible for is just making sure the sounds are right. But in film and TV, it's got to be everything, because you are the language expert on set. And so the writers and the producers and the actors and the director will come to you and be like, well, if we change, how would they say this in 16th century Salem? So you really need to, like, try to be as up on all of it as you can, and or have people on the phone that you can call and be like, I have a question. I'm in Hungary and I need to know, Mexican slang for whatever it is. So you've got to have somebody in Mexico City that you can call. So dialect coaches may be sort of appropriate there. But the thing that gets confusing is that there's a North American tradition in the theater world, and thus the film and TV world, of using those words very differently. So people would say an accent is something that is spoken by non-native speakers. So it's always L2. And a dialect is a native speaker variety. And so we can talk about a Cockney dialect or a Texas dialect or a Minnesota dialect or a, Sydney dialect, but we talk about a German accent or a French accent or a Swedish accent or something like that. And I think it is useful to have a very quick shorthand to be talking about L1 versus L2 accents. Hey, look at that. There's a shorthand. Because there are different issues and things that we come up with. But the fact that usage is not aligned with what linguists mean and what everybody else in the world means, I think is sort of problematic. So I think it's kind of it's falling by the wayside now. I think as more younger coaches come up and we have a little bit stronger bridges with linguistics and socio and things, I think it's falling by the wayside.
Why did you decide to become a dialect coach? What drew you to this work?
Wow. So I'm going to try not to ramble on too long.
Ramble away.
Yes.
Because it's a long and winding path. And I think that's actually really typical. First of all, there aren't many of us, at least working in film and TV on major productions. It's a pretty small, like worldwide, it's a pretty small club. We either all know each other directly or at least know of each other. And so it's a much bigger world if we talk about like sort of theater, voice and speech, teachers, training actors in MFA programs and conservatory programs and working in regional theaters. That's a much bigger club, right? But it's still pretty niche. There's no specific university degree or kind of approved path for becoming a dialect coach. It's a really random thing. And there are, at last count, I think there are basically 2 or 3 coaches working in film and TV who come from an academic linguistic background. Everybody else is actors. And I get a lot of questions from linguistics undergrads or people interested who are like, how do you get to do, what you do? And one of the first pieces of advice that I give people is act. Act as much as you can, learn as much as you can about acting, about different aspects of the craft of acting and storytelling in this way, and filmmaking as well, because I think it's unbelievably super important for us to know as much as we possibly can about phonetics in a really, really deep and detailed way, about phonology to some extent, about articulatory mechanics and pedagogical, strategies for being able to teach this in a bunch of different ways, because people receive things in all different ways. As much as we can about prosody and intonation and socio stuff, everything that we can possibly glean. But at the end of the day, the job is to support actors. It's to support actors and directors and filmmakers in telling the stories that they want to tell in these particular ways. And so it's to support that. And you really, really, really have to know like how an actor works, how actors work, how acting works, to be able to do that effectively and helpfully and not get in the way. How could you get in the way? By giving them 10 notes after a take, because nobody can do that. By putting the accent first, ahead of the acting, ahead of the human interaction. I mean, I work on productions. I also work with private clients when I'm not on a production. And kind of all the way up and down the spectrum, from A-list actors who have months to prepare for a role. Hopefully at that point the production is paying, but all the way down to student actors or recently graduated young actors trying to sort of make it work, figure out their first job, and they have an audition to prepare for. So sometimes it's like somebody comes to me and they need a Czech accent tomorrow. So, that's not a lot of time. And like, it takes longer. This is one of the main points I've tried to make in some of those Wired videos is it's hard stuff and it takes a long time. It takes a long time to really get all the pieces in place and get it technically accurate, but then also to have it sink in, to have it fully integrated so that it's second nature, so that you can act through it, so that you can be truthfully present and listening and responsive in it. I can get in the way by making the accent more important. And that sucks. It doesn't work because, even if you this is something I'll say to, an actor that I'm coaching who has to have this Czech accent tomorrow, right? I'll give them as many things as I can that feel useful and try to find the things that make other things happen, make other things come right. But, even if their accent is perfect, they're not going to get the job. Like, they're going to book the job if they're bringing something compelling and unique and individual and interesting to their interpretation of the part that works for the filmmaker's conception of the story that they want to tell. So that's the most important thing. But then also where I can find links and find connections between especially aspects of what I tend to call oral posture, articulatory settings is more commonly for linguists, between, what we really need for the settings, for the oral posture, for this accent, for this character, and something that they can connect to as an actor, something that is imaginatively useful to them. And I always try to be really, I always try to be really careful about verging into just so stories and stereotypes, because there are a lot of these around, some very popular ones that tend to get repeated a lot, of that the reason why Australian accents sound like they do is because, everything's got to be kind of wide and flat like that. You don't open your mouth a lot because you can't let the bugs in. Right, so that's where that comes from. It's a new one on you, I see. Or it might have also heard is, you can't let the dust in, or it's all kind of going wide like that and you're squinting a lot, right, because you're squinting against the sun. So that's the explanation. That's the just so story for how the Australian accent came to be, right?
And listener, you should see his mouth when he does this.
Strong lip corner retraction.
Yeah. Also, it'd be relevant for Arizonans if this were real. But anyway.
Right? Yeah. Why? So eventually Arizona is surely going to end up sounding like Australia, right? It's amazing how popular this is, though. I mean, it's like lots of people have heard this, and there are many versions. You know, I mean, New York is nasal because you gotta cut across the traffic noise or something like that. Right? The reason why Welsh accents go up and down like this is because there's so many hills in Wales, right? So there's a lot of them. Yeah. So the thing is, it's like these things are so it's kind of like a strong version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It's like these things are so compellingly interesting that you can see why they have a life. And my feeling on this is that like there is a place for making connections between aspects of the accent, especially oral posture, and something that an actor might be able to connect to. It's something I do with like immense caution and lots of caveating, and always saying, look, these things are arbitrary. They're like, there is no reason why these people sound this way. They just do. But if I'm trying to get you to find some, a little bit of jaw protrusion, because we do in London, right? It's Southeast London, so there is a bit of jaw protrusion there, and your character there's something there that there's, I don't know, it's emotional trauma in your past, and there's some defendedness, there's some guardedness. If that makes you feel that way, if you can draw a connection between those things, and it sparks your imagination and kind of brings things to life and makes a connection between like what you are doing in your deep, internal work as an actor and what you're sending out and what we need to do to get to the accent, that solidifies stuff in a really magic way sometimes. So with great, great, great caution, but, doing that a little bit.
So the human connection is an important, I guess, technique in your field then.
Yeah, it's all about working with people, not just actors, but producers too. I mean, you also got to get the job. It's very like any job, there's a lot of politics and sort of making friends and things like that. But acting is hard, man. Really, can I swear on the show?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
It's really fucking hard. And I friggin' love actors because they're so brave. To be, and I'm talking about good actors, right? God, especially if you're talking about film and TV and stuff that's going out now to, be preserved forever and be seen by people all over the world. It is so exposed. It's scary. It's terrifying. And to be able to do it well, you really have to kind of be able to get naked. Emotionally, psychologically naked and very, very exposed. And to layer having to do an accent on top of that and knowing that people from that place are going to be hearing you and critiquing it. It is a lot to take on. So it's really, really, really brave. Yeah. So therefore they have to, if they're working with a dialect coach on an accent or anybody that they're working with in that way, they have to feel like they can trust that person to have their best interests at heart, right? And to take care of them in that way. So yeah, that's a big part of it too. Oh, so I didn't really answer the question though about kind of how I came to be. So I'm an actor. I was an actor. I haven't been on stage for many, many years, but that's how I the first part of my professional life was as an actor doing. Did a lot of Shakespeare. I did a lot of classical work. I did a lot of theater, a lot of regional theater, some off-Broadway stuff. I trained as an actor in London. I went to a place called Webber Douglas that was around for a long time, but is no more. I'd always been really interested in languages and in accents and sort of messed around a lot. One of the things when I went to train at Webber, and I went for 2 years, is that I went really, I wouldn't describe myself now or then as particularly an Anglophile, but I friggin' loved the theater, especially the classical theater and the serious plays. There was so much more in the West End and I grew up in the New York area, right? So I saw lots of Broadway and off Broadway, and there's some exciting stuff, right? But the kind of stuff that I really wanted to do, there was a lot more of it in London, and I really, really loved so many shows that I'd seen, so many actors that I'd seen, and that's what I wanted to stay and do. There were a lot of, and this was 95 when I went to drama school. So there were a lot of Americans working in London, but they only played American parts. And I wanted to do Shakespeare at the National. So, so I was told, you're going to have to be English. You have to 100% perfect spy level, RP, modern RP. And so that's what I did for 2 years. So that was my first like real long deep dive into that. And it worked. I took meetings with, agents and casting directors and stuff. And I ended up not being able to stay because I couldn't get work permit. So I came back. Right. But that was one sort of deep effort at that. And then I did end up, for whatever reason, just always getting cast and stuff as an actor that required accents. Or sometimes in I did a one-man show called Stone, or two-person show called Stones in Its Pockets, where each actor plays like 9 or 10 or 11 different characters, mostly Irish because it's set in Ireland, but a couple of Americans and Brits. I then started doing a lot of voiceover work, and I did a lot of audiobooks. Done about 50 or 60 audiobooks, so that you get to play all the characters when you do that. And sometimes if I had a proper amount of time to prepare, I'd do a deep dive into making sure I could do the Palestinian and the Israeli and the Austrian and the Swedish and the South African characters, and just sort of do the best job I could at all of that. And then I have 2 kids, and traveling around and going out of town was became a lot more difficult. And so I'd always been doing a little teaching and coaching on the side. I went and got serious about that. I got a voice teacher, full training certification, and started teaching at an MFA program, the Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers. So I was teaching there for a few years, teaching speech and phonetics and accents and some voice. And then it was just kind of gradual from there. I started doing a little bit more production work and a little bit less teaching, and then it gradually transitioned until since about 2015, I think. I've really just been doing production work.
Okay, so why did you want to make your map tour videos?
Wow.
I think these questions are not hard, but
no, you guys brought the good questions.
Is there a story there?
No, there's not a story there, but I mean, maybe there is. I resisted doing it for a long time. One of the seeds of it was like people wanting to hear me, in a video that we put out there in the world, doing a lot of accents. Which the first Wired videos that got really popular were they're a series they called Technique Critique, where I'm talking about different accent performances in movies. And that started as a kind of they came to me originally with we want to do a 3-minute video where it's good accents and bad accents. And I'm I'm not interested in that. But I'll tell you what I would be interested in would be talking about why, what goes into it, what it contributes, how it's a layer of storytelling, how it's hard, and how you shouldn't blame the actor because, it takes time. So it needs production support, and actors aren't always in a position to ask for that. And they were like, wow, that all sounds really cool. Tell us more. And there was a guy named Joe Sabia, who was the head of all the video stuff at Condé Nast at the time. And that's how the first one kind of came to be. And the message seemed to sort of really get out there successfully. And I was really happy about that. But so I'll model a couple of sounds here and there, but I scrupulously I didn't want to make one of these show-offy accent videos where, there's one person doing a whole bunch of accents. And there's some really fun stuff out there for sure, right? Not to run that down at all, but I had besides just not feeling totally comfortable, that wasn't really me, I do it when I teach, right? Because I'm very happy to impress my students and do the party tricks.
Aren't we all?
And when I'm working with an accent, I mean, even though we're always using a native speaker model, I'm always modeling the accent when I'm coaching an actor one-on-one for usually almost the entire time that we're coaching, because that is an effective way of coaching and kind of coaxing them along, having them hear it a lot. But I was just a little uncomfortable with the kind of the look at me aspect of it. But it's also there's an idea that is understandable but wrong, which is that being a good accent coach is the same thing as being able to do a bunch of accents really well, or that being able to do a bunch of accents really well means you're going to be able to be a good coach. I know a ton of really good coaches who maybe aren't all that great at all of them all the time. And vice versa. I know plenty of people who are brilliant at accents who have no idea how they do what they do. I was one of those until I kind of figured it out, until I met 2 wonderful mentors, two teachers named Phil Thompson and Dudley Knight, who I learned an immense amount from and owe an immense amount to. And it was kind of like a magic key was given to me and sort of opened the gates. And I was like, oh, that's how I do what I do. Now I can teach it. And that was linguistics, basically. I mean, that was kind of, phonetics and phonology and linguistics. But so how did it come to be? So there's so I hadn't wanted to perpetuate that, right? But at a certain point, I kind of felt like, the message is out there, and we have this body of work, and this would be an interesting thing to do. There's a brilliant video out there. It's really short. I think it's a minute and a half, where a great dialect coach named Andrew Jack, who's the guy who did all the Lord of the Rings movies, all the newer Star Wars movies, an unbelievable resume. And he tragically, he died in the first month of COVID last year. And he was an amazing guy. I never met him personally, but I have a lot of close friends who he was just a really, really great mentor to. Everybody who worked with him loved him. Anyway, he has this great video where it's like a tour of the UK, and he does seamlessly and really beautifully about 17 accents. And we see a map, and it's just going around the map, and he's sort of saying things. Unfortunately, so the modeling is incredible, right? And he was a great coach. Unfortunately, the whole thing starts with, well, RP, the great communicator. This, of course, is by far the most intelligible accent in the English-speaking. And then it kind of goes on from there. It's not all like that, right? But, but there's something about, and Dublin tends to have a more lyrical, poetic sound, and there's a lot of these, at least verging on some of these characterizations of like saying that because something sounds this way, it is, and these people are. So there are things that I, kind of object to in there. But it's basically, it's a wonderful piece of work. The problem then with a map tour became, all right, if I'm going to do a bunch of modeling, great, but there are accents that even if I might do them in private because I have a client who wants to work on this with me and has hired me to work on this with them, that I shouldn't be doing publicly, that I have absolutely no business sort of putting out there. But if we were going to do a map tour of the US, it was really important to me that it be representative and diverse. And so what we ended up with was, I'm so super, super happy with the way it worked out, because we were able to bring on, linguists of color and people like Sun Michaud, who's not a linguist, but is a language teacher of Gullah Geechee and a native speaker of Gullah Geechee, to talk about Gullah Geechee. And then intersperse native speaker clips, while also me playing around in a sandbox and having fun and being silly, sort of doing these various things. But because we were also bringing some real linguistic content to it, I think we managed to thread what at one point looked to me like a really daunting needle to thread.
Why do you think it's so upsetting for someone when they hear their accent portrayed, quote unquote, wrong in a movie or on TV?
Wow. That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I think just on the very most basic level, if you're being represented and someone's getting you wrong, like, of course that's going to be a little bothersome or a little upsetting. I think where it gets really explosive then is where we have people who have a history of being misrepresented, right? Or having, versions of their accents, let's say, misappropriated and like used and mocked for racist ends. And so when we have that, and that can be anything from like minority groups in the US to like the Irish, because there are many, many, many groups, there are many speakers, there are many cultures and groups of people who have been on the short end of that stick at one time or another, and who remember that, for whom it is fresh, for whom it is present day reality. And so I think there's probably a sliding scale of, how upsetting it can be or how upsetting it might be to any individual person when somebody does their accent and gets it wrong. But there are definitely very good, very real, very understandable reasons why a lot of people might get upset. But yeah, I also just think it's like, I don't know, sometimes it's fun.
I was gonna say, sometimes it's fun, right? Like a bad, quote unquote, bad California accent can be really fun.
Or a bad Canadian accent.
We're about to see. You may be about to see both of those in Map Tour Part 3. It's about to come out.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this reminds me, Sadie Ryan from Accent-uate did a whole episode on bad accents and in TV and movies, and had us talk about our favorites.
Oh, really? Oh, I have to hear that.
Yeah, it's a great episode.
And so I was gonna say my favorite quote unquote bad accent is hands down Daniel Craig's in Knives Out. What's his character's name?
Foghorn Leghorn.
I don't remember, but I love it.
He actually used Horton Foote. Shelby Foote. I believe I just heard, somebody just told me this, I don't know if it's accurate, but I think it probably is, used Shelby Foote as a model. So tell me, like, what do you think was terrible about it?
I thought it was fantastic, but I heard some people from the, just articles and headlines like, what was that accent? What was he doing with that? What is this British guy doing to a Southern accent? I
understood that it was just a really old-fashioned accent that no one uses anymore. I don't know if that's true.
That's definitely true. I think there were I got asked about this a lot, and I tend not to, I do get asked a lot about what I think about individual performances on Twitter and stuff, and I'm really leery of doing that because I'm not a movie reviewer. Also, I'm a dialect coach. I work with people to support actors to try to, sort of help them do better. And it really, 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 really isn't almost ever the actor's fault when it does go wrong. Because it's hard, it takes time, it needs production support. Actors are not often most actors most of the time are not in a position to really ask for that or necessarily understand, right, that it is. All those reasons. Anyway, I've been over that before. But with that one, I think it's two things. It wasn't fully in there. It wasn't fully comfortable. So I think we can feel it being held at a little bit of a distance. It didn't have that sort of final step of work. But I also think that it feels to me, and I don't even remember who the coach was on it, or if there was a coach. I assume there was, but I'm not sure. So this is just speculation from the performance, right? And from knowing how these things work sometimes. It feels like he was wielding it for a purpose.
Yes, absolutely.
And they chose a model that was, in fact, a very old-fashioned model. Somebody who, if anybody still does speak with an accent like that, they are very old. They are not the age of that character in the movie. So those are intentional choices. I can't speak to exactly what it was, but the whole movie's kind of heightened. Very heightened, right? And so the accent, I think, was felt to be a piece of that. And is it successful? Ultimately that's a judgment call, right? But I think
so.
For me, it was.
It was 110% successful.
So I think an interesting conversation has to be like, well, okay, well, what was this for? What were they trying to go for, right? So,
right,
that's
absolutely
cool.
Yeah, thank you for about 20 minutes ago, because now I feel like I really am more thoughtful toward the actor when it comes to these things. Because before I was just like,
exception
of who? What?
Well, I don't remember who, but with the exception of at least one actor who refused to use dialect.
What's his name? Twilight.
Robert Pattinson.
Robert Pattinson. Yeah. He refused. Yeah. So then that's his fault.
Yeah.
I kind of liked that one, though.
I never heard it, so I
didn't
have
hear
no
it
judgment.
Yeah, the character was from, I guess I had to do, I did an interview on this. I accepted that one, and so I did a little bit of a deep dive into sort of looking at the models. And the character's from a different place, so it's, and what he did was pretty accurate in a lot of ways. It was sort of slightly heightened. It was slightly florid. You could tell the actor was trying to push it as far as he could and really have fun with it. But it was detailed. It was textured. In terms of the phonetic targets, it was accurate. In terms of some of the rhythm and the prosody as well, it was pretty accurate. And he was, and it was there were reasons for it. There were felt reasons for doing what he was doing. And it did sound different from everybody else in it, but the character was supposed to. He was an outsider.
So, okay, he got the rhythm and prosody. There's so much that can go wrong.
Yes.
So much.
Is.
Yeah, especially with rhythm and prosody, I feel like.
How do you do that?
To me, that is really hard.
How do you teach that? What goes wrong when a movie set in southern Mississippi and someone from southern Mississippi is like, they got that wrong?
I tend to break down accents into 3 elements. And it's a little cute, but it's easy to remember. They're the 3 Ps. And so they're posture, pronunciation, and prosody. So posture is oral posture, articulatory settings, right? It's what's the shape and feel? What are the habitual ways that the jaw and the lips and the tongue and the pharynx and the velum and even the vocal folds themselves, where do they go at rest? Where do they go in interspeech pauses and hesitation sounds? What are the patterns of movement? which part of the tongue tip is hitting which part of the, alveolar ridge or teeth on T, D, and N and L sounds. What are those patterns? What's the overall sort of shape of the tongue, right? Is it kind of, spread and broad and flat and held very, very much that way, the way it might be for a lot of South Asian accents, for example? Is it bunched up and thick in the back kind of all the time, the way it might be for certain American accents? So we want to sort of isolate, what are those patterns in terms of muscular activation and release? How do they work? How do they fit? How do they flow together? So that's posture. Pronunciation is it's what's the inventory of sounds? What's, including, every possible sort of allophone and combination, and what are the contexts that condition them? Let's make sure we get them right. Let's make sure we get them in the right places, because that obviously when you come from RP or Australian or most other Englishes to North American English, there are some pattern changes. We talk in terms of lexical sets. So, right, so some certain little groups of words that like jump over from one lexical set to the other. So it's not enough to just know the equivalent sound. You got to also be aware that, like, for instance, words like of, from, what, was, and because, which are, in lexical set terms, those are strut words when stressed for American English. Of, what, was, from, and because are lot words. So you can't, if you're a Brit trying to do an American accent, you can't just use an American lot vowel, because then you say of, was, from, what, and because, and that sounds wrong. And we know it. We don't always know what it is, but it's like, I kind of think that like 60% of the time when we hear a Brit doing a great American accent, but something's just a little bit off, is one of those 5 words that's popped out, and sort of vice versa.
Interesting. I'm going to pay attention now.
And those are frequent words.
Yeah, exactly, right? They're all, now when unstressed, for most speakers of both varieties will reduce those vowels to a schwa, so it won't come out then. It'll only come out when it's at the end of a sentence or when it gets a little stressed. So, they'll be like, oh yeah, it's made of steel. What's it made of? Right. And so, it's only when it's there, when it's in a strong position, that it pops out and you're like, wait, something's off. So that's the pronunciation aspect of things. And then it's prosody. That's all the musical elements, right? So that's intonation and inflection. It's the rise and fall of pitch, and it's stress and rhythm, pace to a certain extent. We got to get all 3 of those things right. And we really want to try to get all 3 of those things perfect, and then all the way in and deeply integrated. So what goes wrong is usually it's diagnosable as in one of those 3 areas, or they're related. Obviously, there's a very strong relationship between posture and pronunciation. In fact, I usually describe it that way. The oral posture is like the logic that underlies what the inventory of sounds is, right? It's the glue that makes sense of them. Dialect coaches used to talk about, or some still do, talk about sound changes, and I dislike that terminology, because even though I think a skilled accent performer is like, okay, give me this stuff, and then they make sense of it, I think it can lead to a kind of cut and paste job where you get a sort of Frankenstein's monster accent, where it's just my accent, but I've clipped out some of the sounds and put other sounds in, and like that's not how it works. And when prosody goes wrong, it's the equivalent of phonemic interference. It's tonemic interference. It's the actor's habitual prosodic patterns creeping through in a way that is negative transference, right? That doesn't actually work for us in that accent. It is notoriously difficult to work on specifically. I'm still like trial and erroring a bunch of different things. And obviously different things work for different people, right? Some people pick it up so easily, just sort of listening and just doing the melody. But, one of the things that I do with that, as with other aspects, is try to really isolate it. So some of the time that we're working, we're like, if we'll hear, let's say the actor's accent model says something like, would you like a cup of tea? Then I'll have them, instead of repeating that back, I'll have them repeat back, da 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 da. I'll use prot.
Oh, wow, you bring out the spectrogram.
Well, the pitch track, they have 0 track.
Oh, okay.
To actually sort of find, and I'm taking a Toby transcription class right now at MIT with Stephanie Schada-Kaufnagel and Elena Brujos, and it's so cool. So I've kind of done some intonation study more in kind of the British model or tradition. J.C. Wells has a great book called English Intonation. J.D. O'Connor had some good stuff earlier. And I've tried to then apply it when I'm doing American, when I'm, teaching non-native speakers American accents. I've tried to sort of adapt that and apply that. So I've always been kind of curious about Toby, and delving deeper into that is interesting. It's got all kinds of stuff bubbling up for me. But just looking at the visual And then also having people like describe it in the air with their finger, helping them hear and isolate more precisely things both categorically, but also trying to reproduce them exactly. Because, if something is even a little bit off in a way that is not possible for a native speaker of that accent, we can tell, right? Or native speakers of that accent can tell. So all that stuff.
Okay, so you use the example of like a Czech accent. So someone calls you and they're like, I have a audition next week and I need to do a Czech accent. Do you have to do some research before then, or is everything just in your head, right?
Oh, no, I know literally every human accent.
I knew it.
It's all in my head all the time.
Just download it into your brain.
I'm actually an android. I'm a sophisticated AI. Yeah, of course. I mean, there are, we have the greatest hits. I mean, there's stuff I do all the time. Now,
sure, like RP.
Yeah. But which RP is the thing, right? So, so we have, and because the first step is like always, 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 and this is true if we have 6 hours or 6 months, it's find a model, right? We always want to find a native speaker model for something. Now, occasionally we're doing a made up accent. I did an HBO pilot that never saw the light of day, and I'm still broken up about it because it was so friggin' cool. It was about the Salem witch trials. It was a Genji Cohen show, and it was directed by Gus Van Sant. Eddie Izzard was one of the leads. A bunch of great actors. Karen Gillan, who's now like doing crazy, famous, amazing Avengers stuff and other stuff, was in it as well. A bunch of great actors, and we actually we made up. Half the cast was English and half the cast was American, and then there were a few Scots thrown in for good measure. And so we basically semi-reconstructed, semi-made up an accent, and it ended up actually being more like 3 accents for everybody to sort of adopt. And it was all weird and challenging because it was on the fly. Oh, and then we also did Passamaquoddy because there were a lot of Native American characters. So we had a Passamaquoddy native speaker and teacher who did the translation and then was there as a consultant. But then I'm the person who's there helping the actors realize that, because again it's a really specialized sort of skill set. Language teachers and native speakers are not the ones to teach actors how to sound like they speak a language they don't speak. It's like we've got to really get under the hood and know exactly what's going on there. So there's a lot in that one. Big digression, but that's just to say once in a while. We're making something up, and then like I'm going to be making the recordings, or if I can get a female colleague as well, so there's a female voice, that can be really helpful as well. But other than that, we're always looking for a model. So even if I'm teaching something that I know, inside and out, or know a bunch of varieties of inside and out, I still want to make sure that when we found our model, if we have, that I'm teaching specifically to that and to those targets. So there's always that involved. But yeah, I mean, sometimes we don't have, if I just have a private client who books because they have an audition the next day, I'm like, find yourself a model, send it to me, we'll listen to it a little bit, and then we go from there.
So I know you don't want to talk about bad examples, but can you give us a good example that you think? Like
good performances? Good accent performances?
Good... Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many. What are the things that come up for me all the time? So... And these are all ones that have been featured at various times in some of those videos, I think. But I mean, not every performance, but a great many performances by Meryl Streep and by Daniel Day-Lewis, they are both, I think, justly renowned for their expertise with accents and for how much they... And to me, it's kind of like, there's like next level work in a lot of those performances because, when you talk about like finding the connections between like, how the character speaks, what their really idiosyncratic idiolect is, and who they are, and for that to then start to feel like something that is revelatory and like organic and true and real and revelatory, like Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, like Daniel Day-Lewis in Gangs of New York, which was a weird one, like Meryl Streep in Julia, or Julie and Me, if that was called. And that's astonishing because that's idiolect work, right? And she sounded like friggin' Julia Child, but also like you knew why Julia Child sounded that way through that performance. Heath Ledger in Brokeback Mountain is one I think was one of those very first videos because there's something it's great work. It's super accurate. It's super particular and textured and detailed, but it just feels like it's that guy and it's a reflection of that guy. The tightness and twistedness of the oral posture worked for the accent, felt like a real person, but also felt like a reflection of, his sort of tortured soul. Idris Elba, I think, justly, again, praised and famous and renowned for his work in The Wire. I love that.
Yeah, I always forget he's not American.
Yeah, not at all. But he worked on that for 4 years. And it's not Baltimore specific, so we could even find fault with it, right? Because it's not perfect. It is perfect. What he's doing is perfect, right? But it's not Baltimore, it's New York. But he basically he worked in restaurants and studied and immersed himself in that accent for years before he got that part. Daniel Kaluuya didn't have anything like the same sort of prep, but I thought his accent in Get Out was fantastic.
It was really good.
Is there like maybe one wrap up thing? We all have these misconceptions about accents or dialects. What would you hope that someone would walk away from a conversation with you knowing?
Linguistic relativity, oral relativity. Let's call it oral relativity. It's just that the idea that almost all of us, probably all of us really, were exposed to, or maybe really carried around for a long time, that there is one version of the language that is right and true and correct, or the main one, is just a complete and utter fallacy, and a really damaging and destructive one at that. One of the sort of images or mental models that I think is really useful when this comes up is like, I think a lot of us have or had a mental model of sort of standard language variety and then non-standard varieties as like a central hub and these offshoots that are sort of swirling around. And I think there is a point of like sort of starting to get it and starting to sort of think a little bit more progressively about this, where you're like, oh, but that's fine. All those varieties are valid. And like, yes, of course they're valid, but the model's wrong. Because that's not how it works. They're, non-standard varieties are not these like offshoots of like sort of perverse or idiosyncratic, like we're going to make our own thing. It's just parallel lines. It's just parallel streams down throughout history that interweave and like sort of connect, and they come into contact and they veer apart. Chaucer alternated back and forth between Axian and Askian, and like, that ax form has probably been in the language longer than ask. And the reason why ask ended up being the standard one is pure fucking accident, right? It's just the people in and around London, when the money and the power started to cohere in and around London, happened to have settled on the ask form. And so that became the thing. But like, axe has been around just as long, coming down in these parallel streams. So to say that it is somehow wrong, bad, lazy, incorrect, inferior, doesn't make sense, illogical, all of these things that people say is like, not just wrong in the sense of like, oh, all varieties should be equal, but like just no, flat out no. So that'd be the main thing, I think.
That's a perfect main thing. I hope people walk away from conversations with me knowing that as well, and the podcast. That's what we're.
That's what the whole podcast is about, right?
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. And also, we don't want people to be assholes.
Don't be an asshole.
So
that's a very good thing.
Don't be an asshole.
That is so much pithier than anything I
said. Thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. It's great to be here.
The Vocal Fries podcast is produced by me, Carrie Gillen, for Halftone Audio. Theme music by Nick Granum. You can find us on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Vocal Fries Pod. You can email us at vocalfriespod@gmail.com, and our website is vocalfriespod.com.